Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Thunderstock Show. I'm excited to talk with a fellow fractional CXO from Wolf's Edge, Chris Barnes. Chris, can't wait to talk about personal philosophy, business growth, and discussing the intersection between business and the inner game. I know we both are giants of men standing around 5'8", but with a similar sports background. I'm sure we'll dive into how our athletic background kind of shaped our professional career as well. So for everyone listening, the goal here is to give you some stories and valuable insights around development. So without further ado, Chris, what's going on, man? How you doing today?
Hello. Happy, I guess, almost end of the week heading into the holiday weekend.
It is almost the holiday weekend. For those of you that listen to this not live, it is right before school for many people, right around that same time, the Labor Day weekend. Let me ask you, how does this change of the season? I find every quarter, we're still right in the middle of quarter 3, but it feels like this marks the real third quarter or third period of the year for me, where the first part is you got quarter 1 and everything, you're coming out of the holidays, you hit the ground running. Then summer, and I think summer, school ending and starting is its own thing. And I call it like the last third. But what do you see in life that's just different about this time of year?
Well, I don't know if it's different for those of us in Texas, but the shading, the lighting starts to change. And we know it was 70 something degrees at 11 o'clock this morning. Right now it's 89. A few weeks ago, right now it's like 100 and something. At least it feels like it if it's not. So, we've hit the fake fall that happens here in Texas. We're all going to get, tricked a little bit, then it'll get hot again, then it'll finally be over.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. It's in Pennsylvania, you get 90 degrees, hot and sweltering humid, then 45 degrees, and you're flipping the air conditioner to heat. And right now, if it was like this for quite some time, it's 68. So don't even need to have an HVAC going on. You just open some windows. But enough about the weather. You mentioned football in Texas. You grew up playing football. What was it like playing football in Texas, and kind of how did that shape what you wanted to do with your life from an adolescent into adulthood?
Well, I had great coaches. And so there was always the stuff that you see in any TV or movie as far as the discipline that's added. I remember going all the way back to middle school where there was one coach who, when you do whatever it is that caused you have to run, he'd say, okay, you run until I get tired. And so you knew it's like, okay, well, I screwed up. But at the same time, it wasn't just the crazy yelling and all the other caricature type stuff. Like I had one of my favorite coaches was also my science teacher and very thoughtful teaching you. I have middle school memories the most because that's where I was really learning how to do it versus being out in, sandlot football. And so all of those lessons about teaching, I think, is what was part of how I am today, because I love to teach. And then I'm sure I'll do that on this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting frame. It's interesting going back in my own experience. I remember distinctly, I got some of my first wins of business, but I didn't know it was business at the time from sports. So my freshman year, I was a football player. Probably should have been my last year of football, but I played one more, stopped growing. Recruited pretty much our junior high team, our team graduated a bunch of the heavier guys. We had no one. So we brought in the football team. I got about 5 of the players that played line and linebacker to join. And we set the county record for the end of the year tournament. And I got the coaches award because obviously they're like, wow, you convinced 5 people to wrestle a whole season. They did great and because of that, we had a full team and that we set the record. So that was like sales and recruiting and marketing.
Yeah.
And then as I was growing up through school, I did terrible in classes like accounting and things like that. Because I was on, for those of you in the area, Penn Live, it was a very popular forum for sports. So I was making fake profiles, hyping up myself and my team, like essentially like acting as scouts for myself. And I got a bunch of letters that, my performance wasn't all that great, but I definitely was well known from the marketing I did. No offense, accounting teacher, but I think having a career in marketing and doing that during your class was a better use of my time. But what you had told me in a previous conversation that you had at one point wanted to be a personal trainer after getting into weightlifting. What was that stint like, and what did you learn from it?
Well, it was short, it was difficult. And really, it was the idea of being this one person having to take on so many individual clients and just the amount of work that goes into doing that successfully and doing it long term. That's one thing. But the other thing, too, is going back to the way that I teach. Like my own philosophy, even then, was I should be able to teach you to where you don't need me. But if I teach you to where you don't need me, I don't have clients and I'm constantly having to get new ones, right? But when you go into most gyms, what do you get? You get sold this pack, or at least back then you used to. You'd go into like a 24-hour or somewhere. They sell you this big personal training package. And the idea is to re-sign you. But for me, it's not that. It's let's work together. Let's see and get you to a point where you don't need me. And sure, if you want to use me or something for accountability or something along those lines, then great. That's all. That's a different conversation. But more often than not, people hire a trainer and they keep a trainer and they keep a trainer. It goes on and on until eventually they just kind of drop off and then they stop going to the gym and they stop doing all these other things.
Yeah, that's interesting to look at the life cycle of a client, especially in the gym environment. Now, you actually have done some training for friends and family. You were saying you have a son that works out with you. Is that correct? Or
Yeah.
did?
No, he does. He
What's
still
that
does.
like?
Yeah. It was interesting I guess this summer he turned, 14 going into high school and he's taller than me, beginning. And he's like, Dad, can I go with you to the gym? I'm like, sure. And so we go work out, get him his membership and think we'll see how long this lasts. And so he goes with his friends a few times and they're there for like 2 hours. And I'm like, son, there's no reason to be at the gym for 2 hours. And so I take him with me while his friends are there. And I said, the two of us are going to be done. We're going to do cardio and our workout and be done in 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on what we're doing. And we did that. And in the meantime, I pointed at his friends that were like running around, playing tag, doing stuff you don't do and you shouldn't be doing in the gym anyway. And I said, that will get you kicked out and you're not doing any good. You're wasting your time. And what I found out recently was he told my wife he's really enjoying it. Well, now my 11-year-old wants to go to the gym. So my two boys want to hang out at the gym. They don't want to hang out anywhere else, but they do want to hang out at the gym. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting being able to point out you can get more done in less time. And as a fractional, it's also important to educate the market and our prospects that like, look, don't don't judge by the amount of time spent. Judge by the work that gets done with the time focused time there. And
Yeah.
you're right. One of the lessons that I had to unlearn from weightlifting in particular is I used to think 2 hours was if you're not in the gym for 2 hours, you're not working hard. But what you learn when you start to get some of these grays in your beard and things you don't recover like you used to back in your late teens, early 20s is you got to be a lot smarter with the work that you do and being efficient so that you can take the appropriate time to recover because the muscle building and gains happen. Sure, you needed to put the work into the gym, but it's how well do you recover and then injury prevention. What are some of the things that you see in your philosophy on personal training and physical training that are more than just the physical, but maybe the spiritual or the professional, like the habits and lessons that are crossovers?
I think you're going to uncover a thread that I didn't even think about until you just said asked this question. But there's the discipline, there's the consistency. It's really that aspect of it. You go to a gym one day, you don't see any change. You're sore, but you don't see any change. And you go for 2 weeks, you really still don't see any change, especially if you're thinking of it from being a teenager, right, who's just started lifting weights. And I think that that's the same across the board with all the things that we do in life. We look at people who have arrived at where we think we want to be. And we don't realize like we're at 0, they're at 20, and we need to go from 0 through 19 to get to that. Right. And so I think that's going all the way through both of these examples of being consistent day in, day out, doing the thing that you need to do and being disciplined.
Yeah, compound interest, one of the key ingredients is time.
Yeah.
It's effort, disciplined effort over time. You know, if you go as hard as you can for 3 days in a row, and then you take off a week or two, it's not nearly as effective as if you go 80% for, you
Mhm.
know, 9 or 10 sessions out of 14 days. And the longer the timeline, the more that's true. I recently saw an article or a social media post that stated with research that it is more rare to be a person that can bench press 225 pounds
Yeah.
than to have a $10 million net worth. And I was floored because I have only one of those things, and that's a bench press. I don't have a $10 million net worth right now. And I think to your point, you have, a son that you said was around 14 and one that's around
Mhm.
11 getting into it. When you let compound interest start at that age, in 10 years, there's a high likelihood that you can hit that goal. Whereas with business, most people don't have their career starting till 18, 22, 23. And it's
Mhm.
a very long thing, but compound interest can work that way too.
Sure.
Figured you'd get a kick out of that little bit of research study. Going back, you had a stint as a personal trainer. Now you do coaching. A lot of ways we could talk about fractionalist coaching. But before you were a coach, what was it in business that you played? What were some of the experiences that were
Yeah.
transformative along the way?
Well, so I got an IT over 20 years ago at this point. And so I remember getting into that. And that's actually, you know, and exploring the personal training route is what led me to the technology route, because in the early 2000s, it was the fastest way to make money, for one. And it was just a lot more appealing to me. And so I went in, I'm like, I'm going to be a CIO one day. Went into computer networking. That was my deal because, it even applies now. So I love to bring things together, and something I just do innately, whether it's people or different ideas, different disciplines, all kinds of stuff, and synthesizing them. Well, I didn't know all that then, obviously. And so I started down the IT path, ended up through a few companies, and ultimately landed at an accounting firm and spent 19 years in the public accounting industry, where I started as network administrator at that company, made myself up through IT director, CIO, then ultimately the COO while being there. And within the company, talking about time and hourly thought processes, accounting and legal are like the two chiefs of that mindset. And so one of the things that we did was we were able to change that by bringing in Lean Six Sigma, which is something I was also heavily involved in, ended up um, green belt, Lean Six Sigma green belt. But doing all of that is what moved me into what would become the COO role. And that's when it became more about the whole company, building teams operationally, helping with the other teams as well. And that's where coaching started intentionally. Before, we've always done it. I've always done it, but I didn't have language for it. I didn't have any frameworks for it. I just knew this is how I need to interact with this individual to get them moving in the direction we need them to move in.
Yeah. And I love how one of your early goals was to obtain the title of CIO, right? With IT. And then you got it. And what did it feel like once you've hit the goal? Because I
I
think
was
a
already
lot of
past it.
people,
Like, I was already past it. It was great in the sense of creating, because I had to actually create the role from what I was doing so that it matched. And it wasn't something where it was like, oh, you got a title here, but it wouldn't work anywhere else. It needed to translate to any other business I could potentially go to if I had left. And so it felt validating. It was great, especially when they agreed that I had gotten through those benchmarks or whatever. But I was also in this phase where I was looking beyond it at the same time I got it.
right? I think one of the reasons I asked that question is that, at least as it pertains to strategic thinking, a problem that companies have that I've seen, I want to hear your feedback, is they think too short term, or they put too much emphasis on a discrete period of time. Like, at CIO, if you didn't have a new horizon, and it's the phrase, be careful what you wish for, you might just get it. And it's
Mhm.
like, if you don't continually reset goals aren't, it's not like you succeed by getting to a destination. It's the journey of continually changing the destination. How far can you go? How can
Yep.
you do it the most efficiently? But what are some of your ways that you look at strategy in business, and how is it different than maybe some peers or other people that you run into? Like, what are some unique perspectives you have on like business strategy in particular?
I don't know if I say they're unique. I'm somebody that just has this insatiable ability to take in data information and synthesize it really quickly. Part of that is because I meditate. I started doing that in 2019, and it actually does change the structure of your brain. But in addition to that, it's just this desire that popped up at some point. I think what tends to happen, if you look at the technology side of things, you don't find many people with a technologist background. In fact, our founding partner, and when he asked me, "Hey, I want you to take over everything that's not tax or audit, and we're gonna, put this all under operations." The reason why he said that, he said, "I never thought a tech jockey could do what you've done." That was his nickname for me, right? The tech jockey. And you don't see very many people in technology who are able to think across the business and outside of their silo or outside of their discipline. But it's not just technologists. One of my favorite books is the book Range. And as I say it, I completely forgot the author's name. But in that book, he talks about how specialized we've become. And that's necessary to some degree. But what we've lost sight of is the people who have range and how much impact they have, and being able to go somewhat deep, but also wide, and then bring these different concepts together. Right. And I think that's partly what's happening, even with this adoption of AI and people going to ask ChatGPT for so much stuff. ChatGPT, or whoever you're using, whichever one you're using, is pulling from this wide and deep toolbox to be able to bring you insights. Now, you obviously have to still go double check it and all the things that we warn against, but that's what they're doing. But we don't have enough people that can do that. And so, answering your question, I'll bring it home of, I guess my unique ability there is the ability to do that and synthesize very quickly.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines of the amount of people who I know in IT, which is fairly a bit just from the intersection of what I've done in my career. One of my early friends in college that got me sort of tuned into entrepreneurship as an option was so competent. People used to call him hardware Jesus. Like he was just like, he could like bring back to life any hardware technical thing. And I was always like, wow, you got such a unique skill set. And he would take that same type of skill set to other things, like got really
Mhm.
into um, agriculture and like
Hmm.
raising animals and like farming. And I was like, well, it seems totally unrelated. He goes, oh no, it's just a process. He's like,
Yeah.
you got to use the right tools and, inputs and outputs to get desired thing. And he like grew a forest around his house or whatever. But he always tells me, he's like, I can't stand people. I can't stand working with people. I always want to work on my own. But the difference between someone who's very competent as an individual contributor and someone who's competent as a coach or a leader is you've got to know about what each person does on the field or in the business, but then you gotta be able to put the right players in the right seats on the bus. And I think that if I had to say one recurring issue of all businesses I've touched is people. So, how do you take your skill set of synthesizing inputs and pattern recognition to help to, play fantasy football, but in real life businesses, right? To optimize the team.
Yeah. Well, part of that is being able to listen and actually like people. Where you're talking about, friend is like, I don't like people. I love people. We talk about the three pillars of a business: people, process, and technology. And the first part of my, professional career was about, at a time when every answer seemed to be solved with technology. So of course, you got a problem, you got some tech to solve it. Um, then it moved into process, but the reality is that people use the processes and the technology, right? They implement the processes, they create the processes, and they use the technology. So if you're not addressing the people component, then you're not addressing anything. In fact, I heard someone say that there are really two business problems that you'll ever have. It's either people or process or some combination of both. And so with people, I think the key component for me and how I operate when I go into a client or my old firm, it doesn't matter. It's listening very deeply. So I will let people talk because there's going to be something that they say that helps me connect with them. And if you think about one of the key responsibilities of a leader, it's to get results through other people. So in order for me to get results through this person, I have to listen well enough and engage well enough and establish that rapport and trust to where I understand whether or not they're right person, right seat, the phrase that we like to use, and figure out what their unique ability is if I can, the thing that drives them, all of those sorts of things. I have to do that in a short time with the understanding of this is the overall goal that we have as an organization, and how does this person fit into that? You know, oversimplification would be the chess analogy. but it's kind of like that. You know, it's like 3D chess.
Yeah, the chess analogy is interesting. In any skill development, it's like to swing a golf club, right? On the surface, someone that's never golfed before can look at, oh, you're just swinging a piece of metal and hitting a ball. But there are so many adjustments to make. And I find that specifically what you talk about with the skill set of listening and building trust, if you focus on a few things like core principles that are simple and you repeatable, you have a better chance of solving an issue at a time versus 100 issues all at once and not really solving any of them. So
Mhm.
my question for you is, how do you balance systems and human connection? How do you balance like the technological, so the technology and the process with building trust with people quickly and effectively? What does that look like?
Hmm. It's a good question. I don't think I've ever thought about it as a process to articulate it. But I mean, the very first thing I do is start with the people. I don't start with the systems and the process. If you had asked me this 10 years ago, I would probably start with the process and the technology. And it's about finding the tech that the industry needed and whatever process, and then essentially telling the people what we're doing, right? Going to get buy-in after everything is done. I think now it's so I'm thinking of a client, go into the business. I understand what the goal is, the North Star for what the company's trying to achieve. I understand how they make their money. But when I first come in, I don't know anything about the people. So before I go to say, well, hey, you know what? You're in this industry. Have you looked at this technology? Or hey, tell me about your processes. I need to figure out who are the people, what drives them. So that's just where I start. But in the one-on-one, so I'm very big on Andy Rowe's way of sort of meeting, doing one-on-ones regularly, weekly, maybe bi-weekly, depending on the environment, but no longer apart than that. Having a lot of one-on-one time with people, even if it's only 30 minutes for those one-on-ones, because that's where they unload and they tell you who they are, and you can start nudging them a little bit in the direction that you see that they may need to go, and see if they're able to do and handle it. And then once you find out what they can handle, what their capacity is there, if they're the right person, you can turn them loose. You know, I used to tell people
Start
like,
with understanding and then be liberal with trust once you've asked the questions, you've gathered the detail without, not assuming things,
yeah,
but two ears, one mouth.
you use the word trust, and my whiteboard has the trust formula up there at the top. I keep that up there, but it's character plus competence, right? My wife doesn't trust me to do surgery on her, nor should she. I'm not competent in it. Might have great character, but if I'm not competent in it, then I shouldn't be doing it. And I'm not going to get trust from anybody about doing that. And so coming in, helping people understand that you're there for them, showing the competence that they need to see, and also the character is what establishes that trust.
We've talked before about a term, regenerative leadership.
Mhm.
What is that and how is it different than other types of leadership in your
It's
words?
funny. I was thinking about because I keep rewording this
Uh-huh.
idea as I'm refining it, but it's really just if you think about it like growing crops, for example, or flowers or whatever, right? There are certain things that you have to do to the soil so they continue to turn out healthy crops. And then when you use up what's there, what do you have to do?
Replenish it.
Yep. And so within the business within the business environment of this, it's creating environments that do that for people while still having the processes and technology to further the business. So when somebody comes into your organization, are they recharged by being there?
Right.
All right. As
What's
a
the net promoter
leader, do you do
score?
that?
What's the net
Yeah.
promoter score of your of your team versus just your customers?
Yeah. Well, that is a point, but also beyond that, because I know how those are great measuring
Sure.
tools and everything, but it's one thing to say this is a great place to work, like it's cool, it's got the perks, I got the time off. My boss at least talks to me,
Mhm.
regularly. Like, I don't think the bar is very high for net promoter scores or EMPS. But I think it's something different when somebody says, you know what, like not only would I go to bat for this leader, like like they help me recharge by being in this. And it's not just one manager or leader, it's the whole leadership of the organization.
Yeah, there's a trivium that my grandfather, I can still picture the plaque hanging up in his office I would see growing up. Is it true? Is it useful? Is it kind?
Mm,
You can be a very kind business leader and be nice to everyone and treat them well. But if they don't trust that what you're saying is true, and if they don't believe in the work they're doing being useful to the mission, you're sitting on a one-legged stool. I mean, that thing's
yeah.
going to collapse. That's a balancing act to maintain a healthy culture. So,
Mhm.
what are some of the ways that you, as a leader, regenerate and recharge and stay fresh in the business so that you're, we talked earlier about with weightlifting and fitness, the importance of carefully planned workouts and making
Mhm.
good use of your time, and then recovery so you can show up again the next time. But how do you implement that type of protocol within yourself to stay, on your A game?
Well, if I could move my camera, you would see all these books that are stacked up around me that I haven't put away yet because I pull from them. But one of them is that it's reading. It's a ton of reading, finding different things in the business that I can now go attack. When you mentioned before, like trying to do all of these things at once, well, we don't boil the ocean, right? We don't try to boil the ocean, but somebody thinking strategically at least knows the ocean is there, boil. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, there do we really need to boil it? Well, no, we don't. We're actually over in this part right here of the ocean. But even that is too much for us to take on right now. So I just create a plan for that. And then you can start tapping people to see, hey, okay, we're going to do the thing that needs to be done right now, right? Prioritize. And then as there becomes capacity to do these other things, let's play. I always call it let's play, whether it's strategizing about something or it's just going ahead and trying to tackle something because it shifts the way I have to think. And that's my regenerative piece for me is how am I using my brain?
Yeah, I
You know?
think that people, what I've seen, whether it's in athletic pursuits or business pursuits or any skill development pursuit, and I'll use a story from my younger brother. He's a mathematician.
Oh,
He said, there are people in grad school that are 5 years older than me that aren't as published or as close to the goal of tenure track or whatever. And he goes, they spend 16 hours a day on math. He goes, I spend 8 to 10. And the other time that they're spending on math that I'm not, I'm walking my dog. I'm
mhm.
dating my now wife. I'm
Yep.
going to the gym. I'm cooking healthy meals that takes my mind off of it. He goes, because if you're always, if you're never greasing the groove and you're always just going, it's you don't get dramatic improvement. What you get is whatever the opposite of regenerative leadership is. I think that's what it
Diminishing
is.
returns. Diminishing
Yes.
returns. Yeah. Yeah. I'll go back to what you said before about the gym. And that was the key point you made about rest. Right. It's the what a lot of people don't realize. Like that's one of the most important components of it is how much time do you take away from the gym so that your body can do what it needs to do so that you see those gains. And you're talking about dating. Yes, I date my wife. Meditation, already talked about it. The gym, walks, time with family, all of that stuff. And for me, I'm always reading multiple different books, but they could be about all kinds of different things. And then next thing you know, I'm on a call with you and we're talking about nutrition, weightlifting, technology, and operations all in the same call.
And they're all for the same goal of optimizing
Yeah.
human energy. But we're keeping the end in mind, that the goalpost. We're still getting closer to this conversation towards that goal. It's just there's different vehicles for certain ways. Sometimes you got to get in a car and drive. Sometimes it's better to take a
Mm,
plane. Sometimes, maybe get off the beaten path and go for a hike. They're all
yeah.
ways to move forward, but right, there's a time and place for every way.
Mhm.
I think another question I want to ask you is, you're with Wolf's Edge Integrators. So you're truly in the fractional space, and you get to, see the high level. How'd you know that this was the right thing for you? And what was it like to transition from what you were doing in your C-suite in company to the Wolf's
Mhm.
Edge fractional model? Like, what were some of the triggers or signs that you could see the pattern, like this is the right next step?
So I actually read a book. Ben Wolf wrote a book on fractional work, and a friend of mine actually referred me to Ben's organization. Looked him up, read his book, and I was like, "This sounds exactly like what I want to do." Because I told my friend, I said, we've done all this work in this business. We were going through a merger, and I said, I just want to help other small businesses do the things that we were able to do and a shortcut. And that's when he said, "Hey, look up Ben Wolf." And so I did. And after reading the book, I said, "Yeah, this sounds like what I want." And then it wasn't until I really got into it and started having client work that I was like, "Oh yeah." this is what I want. Like, this is exactly the thing because I think when you're internal in an organization, whatever the role, right, your path is a little harder because everyone knows you. When somebody pays you to come in and do those same things, your path is I won't say easy, but it's a little easier because that means they're in enough pain and they're like, we need your help. We want your help. And for us, like we sit in the org chart. So we're not consultants that are going to come do an, analysis and give you a book and go, here you go. Good luck. We sit in the org chart. So because of that, what we're doing is either felt by the organization or it's not. And if it's not, you tend to lose a client if that's the case. And so we're not trying to lose clients. So we make sure we're in there and we're doing the work that we said we are going to do. But once we hit that end of the 9 to 18-month window that we would be there, sometimes it's a little more, sometimes less. Once we get done with our engagement, like we don't want to be the one that's there for maintenance. So we hire our
Mm.
replacement or elevate them. And that's the other thing that keeps us fresh as a team. So there are 14 of us and we like to go on to that next challenge. And fractionally, you get to do that.
Goes back to the idea we talked about with regenerative leadership versus diminishing returns. I think it's a great theme.
Mm,
It's if you were to be with an organization for 36, 48, 60 months and doing maintenance for the greater portion of the entire engagement, it's going to stress you out. It's probably going to
yeah.
stress the client out, right? Because it's like that false belief of a safety net or security blanket. It's
Mm,
like, no, trust me, you got to like believe in your own wings that like we can
yeah.
replace, like you can, I can exit and elevate the next person. They're ready.
Yeah.
Um, and again, it goes back to the personal training thing. Like,
Hmm.
one of the most fun, memorable times as a coach for sports has not been taking somebody who was the best guy in the team and helping them to get a state medal in wrestling or anything like
Hmm.
that. It's been taking somebody with no self-esteem, little
Yeah.
experience, who was getting bullied and getting him a varsity jacket with a winning record and enough belief that he could go out in the world and have a career and make
Yeah.
something of himself. So what are some of the ways that you take the objective reality of systems and process and technology and data, and then you make that human connection where they feel it, right? Because some people, as much as I want to say human beings are logical, sometimes we aren't. We make emotional decisions. But how do you help people synthesize data and systems thinking and integrate with their emotions so that, because I think a lot of times anxiety could either be a negative of fear or a positive of excitement, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. So the answer really to this is I don't know. I just know when it happens. And so I have examples of starting with my tech background of multiple clients or internal team members at the company who have said, Chris, I was afraid of technology. And then I interacted with you and we were talking and whatever ended up happening. And there just becomes this moment for them where they're not scared anymore. Right. And recently I had a client that paid me to come in. It's an oil and gas company for one. And so, the age in the room range was probably from 30 something to late 70s. And there were people that were afraid of AI. And so I went in to teach everyone about AI, just kind of a beginner's lesson. By the time we finished, it was supposed to be an hour, turned into an hour and a half because there were questions and conversations. And I looked over at somebody that I knew was really anxious about it, to your point, and she was smiling and felt I got other stories. There's one, I was talking to a friend. She's like, you did it again. I'm like, what did I do? I don't know what I did. Can you help me understand what I did? Where we were talking about some transition, and it was a big thing for her to grasp, basically, and just simplified it. And she's like, there you go again. So I
Hey,
don't know what it is, but there's this thing that happens when working with people where they have that moment.
look, I'm going to be very bold and say I think I know what it is. There's a
Yeah.
difference between knowing and understanding. When I was a kid, I knew it all. The older I
Yeah.
get, the more I understand how much I didn't know. And your answer was, I don't know, but I understand it when I see it. And so it's same thing when it's from a spiritual or religious perspective. It's like the opposite of faith isn't doubt, it's certainty. And the opposite of, in my opinion, knowledge isn't necessarily lack of knowledge, because there's always a sliding scale.
Mhm.
It's understanding. where understanding requires that you literally are a student of
Yeah.
versus you're like a lifelong learner, part of your regenerative leadership, I'm sure. You're always
Yes.
learning, you're always reading, you're always improving. It's not like you've arrived as I am the guru, and because of this flag in arbitrarily in this, where I am in my position, therefore thou shalt listen to me. You're like,
Yeah.
that's my take on knowing versus
Yeah.
understanding and how that works.
I like that. I mean, it sounds like even wisdom is in there to some degree, right? Like knowing how or when to use something in a way that helps somebody else gain their understanding. As I was listening to you say that, I was like, yeah. My eighth grade science teacher, I remember he was talking about knowledge, and he said, "The more you know, the more you don't know," and that's always stuck with me. It's always kept me humble because you walk into a library, right? And you're like, this is everything I don't know. Barnes and Noble, take your pick. A few of them still exist.
Mhm.
But yeah,
And going back to AI, it's such an important topic in time. People thought that the world was going to end when 1999 became the year 2000. I'm sure being in the
yes,
IT space around that time, Y2K was a big deal. What are we going to
yep,
do? And then it wasn't.
yeah,
And I kind of feel like that sentiment around I don't want to make light of it and just say that there's not, some downside and there's not some things to be wary of and cautious of. Not
mhm,
what I'm trying to say.
sure,
But what I'm trying to say is like, look, we have to operate from a belief that we can figure it out eventually and we can learn how to use the tools eventually. And it's just a
mhm,
process of catching up. But once you
yeah,
catch up, people know how to use computers, people know how to drive cars. Before
mhm,
cars, you just like, oh, we're going to use horse and buggy forever. Unless you're Amish, that's not the case.
yeah, and nobody wants to go backwards from the smartphone to the old brick phone, right? So,
Yeah,
you know, I think AI is a tool, just like a knife is a tool, right? All these things, we have plenty of tools. It's just, what are you going to do to learn how to use it and use it in a way that is beneficial to you and hopefully others, but not in a way that's going to be destructive. But people use knives and guns destructively too.
of course. And people use leadership destructively too.
Oh boy. Yeah.
I think that I don't want to end the conversation without touching on
Yeah.
what we talk about what good looks like, but what bad looks like. I'm gonna tee up the question for you. Is we know that good looks like understanding others, listening
Mhm.
first, building trust, having one-on-ones and attention, caring,
Yeah.
identifying the gaps and the strengths and really getting someone's SWOT that they can grow into, the potential that you see for them. What does bad look like in leadership? And how do you pinpoint it and you nip it in the bud and you say, no more bad?
So I am a recovering good, bad leadership description user. I just made that up on the fly.
Awesome.
But I try to look at it more of developed versus underdeveloped leadership.
Mm,
The leadership circle profile is something that I bought so much into that I got certified in it. And if you look at the leadership circle, what it shows is it's a circle for a reason. But the bottom half is talking about, and this is where we get into that inner game, it's talking about reactive leadership. Those are still strengths. They're listed down there. The problem is that we over index on those strengths. They were good for a time and got us to a certain point, but we've continued to hold on to them. Well, 75% of the adult population still operates out of that reactive half of the circle. That's why it's so hard to find what we call good and great leaders, because only 25% of the population is operating from that top half of the circle,
yeah, it goes back. It goes back
right?
to the more you know, the more it just becomes astonishing.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that there's fewer people in the world that can bench press 225 than have a $10 million net worth. But
Mhm.
the 3 out of 4 leaders are not developed into the positive tier.
Mhm. Yeah. So, and the top half they call creative leadership. So it's the idea that we're creating reality, if you will. But that's somebody that is really thinking out of, let's just say, both hemispheres of the brain, the hard skills and the soft skills, to oversimplify it a little bit. Whereas if you're in that bottom half, maybe you're just really, you're this take charge, gung ho person, and you do it in a way that's detrimental now, because what the environment needs from you is to not be that way. You still
Mm,
keep that strength, but you've got to expand that strength up above the circle to where instead of power over people, it's power with people, for example.
Mm,
And so
that's it.
that takes work. And so when I see that, I'm dealing with it right now with someone. I steer them differently. I don't say, "Hey, you're a poor leader," or "You're not great at managing people." That's not helpful. But what I do is I have different concepts that I use. The drama triangles is one of my go-to, the Cartman drama triangle. But in showing them how they are showing up, how it affects the team, and how it keeps them from achieving what needs to be achieved.
Yeah. I think that when people have fatalistic binary thinking of black, white, yes, no, good, bad, it doesn't really help people other than that, like make a heuristic shortcut to like, oh, I now could ascribe a label that's oversimplified, and I'm not in that pit of despair where I haven't yet
Yeah.
understood what's going on. That I think is the crutch for that fatalistic yes or no thinking. And what
Hmm.
you're saying is, well, let's take that out and say it's not all good, it's not all bad. There's areas of development that everyone can improve upon, and
Hmm.
let's prioritize the ones that are most prescient or important to do so now.
Yeah.
And not just saying you're bad at communication. It's like, hey, I noticed you did this in this scenario. If you try doing this instead, you might get this outcome, right? Is that like a fair assessment?
I'll take that one a step further because this is what I do. Looking back at what just happened, how could you have done it differently? Right. Because we know usually that conversation began with somebody, with the other person telling me, like I felt like a jerk or I wasn't trying to be a jerk. Well, that means you came off like a jerk. So awareness is good. I don't have to tell you, you just told me. So now how could you have handled that differently? Simple question.
And then giving enough trust and faith and positive reinforcement to not be shackled by fear and
Yeah.
give it another good attempt. Like if you ever see the movie Talladega Nights with Ricky Bobby, it's
Oh,
like, yeah, you crashed your car. Don't freak out. Like you can do it. You
yeah.
still know how to drive.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I love silence as a tool. And so like even in these, like I know it's an interview or it's a discussion. And so I have to remember to consciously pull out of that. But a lot of times I'll just sit and let the uncomfortable silence do its work.
Well, I am going to segue into my favorite part of the show, which will be a
Hmm.
surprise. It's leave a question, ask a question. The last guest I had on has a question for you without knowing anything about you. And then you,
Okay.
after I ask you that question, you can answer, can then ask the next guest I have without knowing anything about them. Sound
Okay.
fair?
Yeah. I'm going to come up with a question, but let's go.
Yeah. Hilariously enough, this is your question, Chris. How do you communicate the impact of strategy to owners who have a tendency to think short term?
It depends. So this is the consultant answer, but it depends on the owner and the relationship I have with them. Because I
Right.
don't have a one size fits all. But for most people, it's talking about the long game. There's going to be some sort of analogy that will come to mind for me in that conversation with them that that they can relate to. So maybe they have kids and they've got a kid that is now an adult, and we've had this conversation about how you know this journey has been with their kids. Well, boom, that gives me something to tie into right away. Right. Um, the other part of it is go fast to go slow. It's one of my favorite analogies. There's the Le Mans track in I forget, Italy, I think it is, but wherever. No, sorry, that's in France. In the Le Mans track, where there's a curve that the expert drivers know to slow down at, because if they're not, they're going to overdrive the car and go wreck. But slowing down to just the right amount gets them the speed that they need to get around these other two curves that are coming. And so I don't know if that's where the phrase "going slow to go fast" comes from, but it ties into that of we've got to slow down so that we can go faster later.
I love slow
Right.
is smooth and smooth is
Smooth as
fast.
fast. Yep.
And go slow to go fast is just like Occam's razor abbreviated, same
Yeah.
feeling.
Yep.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
those are just two quick things that come to mind. I will almost always find something that I can connect with that person about, that is part of their life or who they are or something along those lines, rather than breaking out, the Harvard Business Review version.
I mean, I'm laughing for those of you that are listening only. I'm laughing because as Chris moves to the side, I can see a formula that says trust equals character plus competence. And I think that's a lever or a mechanism to answer the question of Well, you got to build trust. Like, how much trust is in the relationship right now? Do I need to
Mhm.
do I need to display competence? Do I need to understand their character, have them understand mine? How do we build
Mhm.
trust in order to I think trust is the fastest way to get from point A to point B within a organization, because without
Mhm.
it, you don't really get anywhere. And with it, you can move organizations pretty fast.
Do you know where that simplified formula comes from?
I would love to learn it.
The book, Speed of Trust by Covey.
Hey, I was going to bring
So,
up Covey when you say
yep,
seek first to understand as one of the 7 highly effective habits, but I'm not
yep,
surprised.
yep. That's the whole point, right? We have leaders that are like, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go fast. It's like, okay, well, this isn't Silicon Valley where we're like move fast and break things. You're a, I don't know, law firm or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, you've already tried initiatives. They didn't work. They usually failed. Over 70% of the time, change initiatives fails. There's some trust that needs to be built back, even though people come. So,
What
but
question do you have for the next guest, Chris?
yeah, gosh. And you can edit out this pause, I hope, because I'm still really thinking.
Riverside is great for that, so you can take your time.
Questions coming to my brain of what would you do if you could?
Hmm.
And there's no context behind that.
What would you do if you could?
Now, um, I'm thinking of it in the context of the business environment, whether you are in charge or not, because often people feel powerless, but they don't realize how much power they really do have. So that's what's in my brain.
Yeah, it reminds me of an old mentor of mine, Chris DeMay, who said, "Don't let the idea of title dictate the efficacy of leadership." In other words, you can
Hmm.
be a leader in any part of the organization by setting a good example, by
Yep.
being trustworthy, by being a good person. And people shouldn't trust you because shouldn't listen to you because your job title, your authority. They should trust you because you're you. And I think
Yeah.
what would you do if you could is the right kind of open ended question, which is like
Mm.
meditate on that, everyone listening. How's that? Enough with the deep questions. Now for
Yeah.
the superficial, easy ones. Chris, where can people learn more about you, get in touch, connect?
The fastest way to do it is LinkedIn. I've also got a website that's spiralintegration.com. You can check that out. But most impactful for us to be able to help you is wolfsedgeintegrators.com.
Chris, thank you for being on the show. It was a pleasure. And for everyone else listening, thank you as well. My ask is if you know somebody that would benefit from this conversation, hit the share link and let them benefit. Till next
Thanks for
time,
having me.
thank you, Chris.